Chapter 3, The Manager's Changing Work, Environment and Ethical Responsibilities. Basically, doing the right thing. By the time you're done reading this chapter, you should be able to answer whether or not profit is the only goal of a business or only important goal of a business, who the stakeholders that are important to you inside of the organization and outside of the organization. What does the successful manager need to know about ethics and values? And is being socially responsible really necessary? How can you trust that a company is doing the right thing just because they say they are? So we look at the triple bottom line. You've probably heard it, but may not have known exactly what it means. It's simply the 3 P's: people, planet, profit. Those are the focus of an organization. It measures your social, environmental, and financial performance. It is ignorant to say that you go into business to not make a profit. If you don't make a profit, you're always in debt. You will always struggle, and eventually your business will be no more. So your focus is always going to be on profit, but profit should never come before people and planet. So your success can be measured through a social audit. That's an assessment that is systematically created to look at the performance of your organization and how you go about implementing socially responsible programs. In this view of corporate performance, an organization has a responsibility to its employees and to the wider community, which is the people. When you're committed to environmental practices of being sustainable and green, then you're focused on the planet. When you're looking at the cost of pollution, the cost of displacing workers, and other financial factors, that is looking at the profit. And these are matters that rank high in our minds as consumers. 2 scholars have written that millennials appear to be more interested in living lives defined by meaning than by what some would call happiness. In this report, they said that being less focused on financial success has been the focus because they're more focused on making a difference. There have been other studies that support this view, and they found that the principal factor amongst young adults ages 21 to 31 was that they wanted a successful career, a sense of meaning. There was another study that found that millennials who came of age during the 2007 to 2009 Great Recession reported they had greater concern for others and less interest in material goods. They wanted a work-life balance. And this is a term that has been used for decades. However, it appears that the millennials will be the first generation to actually make it a reality. Here's a visual of the community of stakeholders, internal and external. Internal, your focus is on your employees, the owners, and the board of directors. Then you have these 2 external layers of stakeholders. Directly outside, and you have your customers, competitors, allies, unions, governments, the media. And then though they represent the task environment. And then the general environment are all the forces that impact the task environment and the internal stakeholders. So if your stakeholders are those whose interests are affected by your activities, whether they're good or bad, you have to always be mindful of the things that you do and how they impact these individuals and these entities. Owners consist of all those who can claim the organization as their legal property. And some of you may have worked or you know of organizations where they're employee owned, where the founder created the organization that employees actually own parts of the company in whole or in part. The board of directors are elected by stockholders to see that the company is being run according to their interest. They are kind of like overseers of the property, the land, the resources. Our task environment consists of 11 groups that present an organization with daily tasks to handle. Your general environment refers to that macro environment, which is our economic, technological, and social, cultural. External stakeholders have a huge influence on organizations. We'll discuss the task environment in the following slides when we talk about the customers, competitors, suppliers, distributors, strategic allies, local communities, employee organizations, government regulators, financial institutions, special interest groups, and as I mentioned earlier, the mass media. The general environment not only refers to our economic, technological, social, cultural, but it also delves with our demographic, political, legal, and our international. We are constantly having to look through the lens of other people when we make decisions for our organization. So we have our customers. You already know what a customer is. You're one, I'm one. We pay for goods and services. Our competitors are those who are trying to gain leverage to lure our customers away from us and vice versa. The supplier provides us with raw materials, equipment, labor, energy. Our distributor helps sell our goods and services to others. In the textbook, you'll read about Jeff Bezos. He's the founder and CEO of Amazon.com. He's obsessed with customer service. He believes that companies, their success is driven by the customer experience. And in 2014, his company grew to 107 billion with a B dollars. I want you to go and look and see where he stood by the end of 2017. The difference of 3 years. So, can you identify ways that these groups might influence an organization? I want you to think about the various ways your customers, competitors, suppliers, and distributors might influence your organization, influence you as the manager, influence you as the CEO. Then look at these other groups, your strategic allies. This is where you have two organizations who join forces to achieve advantages that you can't perform as well alone. How can a strategic ally influence your organization? How can they help or hinder? How can they motivate you or inspire you or encourage you to make certain decisions or go certain directions? How can the decisions that you make directly impact that strategic ally? Employee organizations are our associations and labor unions. The local communities are also direct influencers and have a vested interest in us. They may institute what are called clawbacks, and that's where you rescind tax breaks when you don't deliver on promised jobs. They may also engage in crowdfunding, which is raising money for a project by obtaining many small amounts of money from many people, which is the crowd. Many of us have been involved in crowdfunding on some ways. Financial institutions, government regulators, special interest groups, and mass media also can have great influence on an organization. Sorry if you guys can hear my dog. So we have two drug companies. They agree to work together to pool their research and development funds to develop a new drug for arthritis. When they do these things, these two organizations have what? Is it a union? Have they formed a union, a strategic alliance? Have they analyzed their internal environment or influenced the mass media? Two drug companies agree to work together to pool their research and development funds to develop a new drug for arthritis. If you don't know what pool means, it's to combine them. If you said B, form a strategic alliance, you are correct. Kinicki International is being picketed by a group of people who live by their biggest plant. The group is concerned about the disposal of waste products into nearby waterways. In this instance, Kinicki is dealing with the blank part of its blank environment. Which one? Is it special interest groups and tasks, local communities and tasks, social, cultural, and general, social, cultural, and task? They're being picketed by a group of people who live by their biggest plant. And they are concerned about the disposal waste products in nearby waterways. If you said B, local communities and tasks, you're correct. Kinicki is dealing with the local community, right? People that live by their biggest plant. And that is part of their task environment. The EPA administers environmental standards in the US. The EPA represents blank part of the organization's blank. Which of these four? If you said C, government regulators and the task environment, you are correct. The EPA is an agency of the US government. So they are government regulators. Now we have some forces. We have the economic, technological, social, cultural. In addition to the task environment, organizations must be very concerned with their general environment. Economic forces consist of the general economic conditions and trends, unemployment, inflation, interest, economic growth. Interesting enough, a lot of employees do not understand the importance of a manager paying close attention to not just unemployment, that's a given, but we need to pay close attention to inflation, interest rates, and economic growth. And maybe even economic growth be considered a given. But how many of you understand the importance of inflation and interest rates and how that impacts an organization? It's very, very important to stay on top of it. Doesn't matter what level of an organization you serve, you need to know about those interest rates and the inflation because those have a great impact on the products that you sell, that you manufacture, that you import, that you export, which then has a direct correlation and impact on the employees that you have and the number of customers that you can serve and where you can serve them. Technological forces, any kind of new developments that can help transform your resources into goods and services. Everything is constantly growing, changing, evolving. You have to stay on top of that. Social cultural forces, when we're looking at trends that originate in a country or a society, or a culture's human relationships and values that may have an impact on an organization. Consider how these forces can influence an organization. When we look at these three forces, demographic, political, legal, and international, demographics are constantly changing and evolving. Age, gender, ethnic origin, population, so many other factors. They're not the same check boxes we had 50, 60 years ago, even 20 years ago. Political, legal, how laws shape opportunities for and threats to an organization. Politics, how they shape the laws, and all of this has a direct impact on an organization. Our international forces, being mindful of the global system and the fact that um, every product that is sold is part of a, a global economy, right? It's part of the global marketplace. You are not, when the moment you step foot in a store, you are part of that global marketplace. You are part of trade. You can't say that you cannot be ignorant to the concept of trade, the functions of trade. If you wear clothes, you wear shoes, you wear jewelry, you have a vehicle or a bicycle, you get on paddle, it's all trade. The public transportation that you ride is still part of trade. Those tires, some of the parts come from overseas, part of trade. So you have to be mindful of that. When you are an ethically responsible manager, you must consider the dilemmas that can arise, and how you have to make decisions to benefit you and your organization, but making sure that they're not unethical or illegal. There was a investigation that you can read about in the textbook of 400 senior executives and 455 college students. And they revealed that 62% of the students believed that they were well prepared to deal with ethical judgments, whereas only 30% of executives actually see students as prepared. It is our perception of what we think we know or what we think we can handle versus what we can actually handle in the real world. In this photo, you see R. Allen Stafford. He was a phony financier. He was sentenced to 110 years in prison for a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Now, which is, you've learned that it's a white collar crime. When you see people like Stafford and Madoff, they're being sentenced to these 110 years, things of that nature, understand that it's not because they defrauded or took advantage of poor people directly. It's usually those big sentences for white collar crimes is when you went after wealthy people. And this is kind of the system's way of balancing those scales. Because 110 years for basically stealing money. That's to send a message. And it's not just to Stafford. I mean, he'll never live to see the end of that sentence. It's to send a message to the other people who are taking part in Ponzi schemes, who are considering Ponzi schemes. That is what that message is for. And most importantly, it's saying, don't mess with wealthy people's money. That's what it comes down to. Because I can tell you that if it was just him stealing from poor people, I'm just going to put it bluntly, his sentence would have been less severe. I hate to say it, it's just the reality. And until it can be the case of balancing those scales, that any victim, no matter what the amount or no matter how severe, is still a victim, and the punishment should weigh heavily enough to deter others from doing the same. So that's just so that it doesn't encourage you to change your target market. See, what some people would do is say, oh, okay, well, what I'll do is I won't target wealthy people. I will just target middle class and working class. I just know I have to get more bodies to um, accumulate the amount of money that I want to bring in. So versus me only having 10 to 20 very wealthy victims, I'd probably need 200 to 400 middle class to working class individuals to kind of get that same kind of gross effect. The crime is the same, so the punishment should be the same. If more people who committed financial crimes, white collar crimes, got these 110 years, we'd see a significant reduction in it. Significant. Moving right along, I spent a lot of time on that, but it's important that I do because clearly this is something that should be taught. I believe it should be taught as early as elementary school, and then it should be layered through development. More and more should be taught throughout the middle school and high school. So by the time you get to college, we can really get you into the nitty gritty of dealing with this. You should not be learning about ethics in college. You should know it. It should be a part of you. What you should be dealing with in college are the major cases involving ethics violations. You should be dealing with all of those deep layers of it. You should be dealing with, on this level, what is being taught in the grad schools. We're behind. So ethics is the standards of right and wrong that help influence our behavior. They vary amongst cultures and countries. There's no, one right way or one wrong way, because what you think is right in the United States could be considered wrong in Japan. So values is something that is relatively permanent, is deeply held underlying beliefs and attitudes that help determine people's behavior. Values are something that usually roll across various cultures. Let me give you an example. There are more countries and cultures that believe that killing people is wrong, right? I'm sure that there may be a culture out there that think that it's fine. I haven't seen them. They haven't popped up on National Geographic that I know of, or any other program that I've seen. But for the most part, 99.9% of countries and cultures believe that murder and killing is wrong. Right? You can't just go next door and just slaughter people. Clear across the board, we all believe that to be true. So in what ways can ethics differ? Because we rely on our values to influence our behavior. So this means that some behavior may be viewed as ethical by some people, but unethical by others. So can you see why some doctors may believe that their attendance at a pharmaceutical presentation that has some top dollar, high, expensive supper, they have a meal attached to it, might be a useful educational experience, while other doctors may believe that top dollar meal was actually a bribe to get the doctors to align with this pharmaceutical company. Defining ethical behavior depends on on a person's value system. In the textbook, this photo that you see refers to sunshine on gifts. Some doctors say that medicine changes so rapidly that they rely on drug companies and fellow doctors to keep them up to date, such as through presentations at medical society dinners financed by pharmaceutical companies. But the Physician Payment Sunshine Act now requires that pharmaceutical companies report all meals, travel expenses, grants, lecture fees, drug samples, and other gifts that they give to physicians. Why do you think that's the case? And do you think these disclosures are necessary? Think about it. So, when you have two value systems that conflict, the value system that stresses financial performance versus the one that stresses having cohesion and solidarity amongst your employees, how could this be a conflict? Think about it. There is a video that McGraw-Hill produced called Focusing on Ethics and People at Whole Foods. It's about a 9-minute video. And at some point I'll share it so that you can look at that. And interesting enough, Whole Foods is now part of, where'd that merger come from? Remember? Amazon? Is that right? So can you see how Whole Foods has a value system that stresses cohesion and solidarity? What have you seen about that? Can you, even without seeing the video, what do you know about Whole Foods? I want you to think about the organization, what you've read, what you've known, if you've gone to any of the locations here in the metro or any other state. But I will try to remember to upload that video so that you all can take part in learning more about the company then, and then you can see about the evolution of the company now through its merger and acquisition. There are 4 approaches to deciding ethical dilemmas. One way is the utilitarian approach. This is guided by what will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. We usually align this approach to financial performance. In what ways can this be problematic for an organization to adhere to? So let me give you an example. If I fire thousands of employees, that may improve the bottom line and provide immediate benefits for our stockholders, but it may damage the workforce morale and lead to the loss of other employees with great experience and skills. Can you see that dilemma? Now, the individual approach is guided by what will result in the individual's best long-term interest, which ultimately means it's everyone's self-interest. It assumes that we will act ethically in the short run to avoid harm in the long run. However, there's a flaw to this, and that could be that my short-term gain may not be good for everyone in the long term. Do you believe that people will make good decisions based on the individual approach? In what ways can this approach be successful? Let me give you an example. If you're caught stealing, you go to jail, therefore you don't steal. Right? That can be the successful approach to that. But what can be something that we consider less successful? So, if you are a serial criminal, right? There's just a revolving door at the jail for you. They almost want to just dedicate a cell just for you. They don't even worry about getting rid of your jumper, your uniform. They just keep it ready for you because you just keep coming in and out. All right? Would you have the values needed to make the decision not to steal. Do you see the difference? All right. If you've been stealing since you were, knee high, that first Jolly Rancher that you stole from the corner store, and it just evolved from there. Um, what values have been embedded in you that help guide you, that would help you make the decision not to steal? There's something to consider. Here's another example. The manager of an agribusiness, these are agricultural businesses, they put chemical fertilizers on the crops every year. And from there, they see it as a benefit, right, to the crops. But the fishing industries downstream from those crops, because remember, they're sprayed, and then from there, the spray with the watering of those crops have to move somewhere. It has to go somewhere. It then goes downstream. Those fishing industries could ultimately suffer if the chemical runoff reduces the number of their fish, if it starts killing off their fish. So the crops are thriving, but the fish are dying. So you see how your long-term interest may not necessarily, or your short-term gain may not be good for someone in the long term. That is the flaw in that. So there's the individual approach. The moral rights approach, an example of this is the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights. And it's guided by respect for fundamental rights that we all have, that we're supposed to have. Life, liberty, privacy, health, safety, and due process. Do you realize that your employers can monitor your emails? Does this conflict with their moral right, to your moral right, I should say? Does this conflict to your moral right to privacy? Is there conflict in that? You have a right to privacy. Is there any conflict to that? In what other ways can moral rights conflict at work? Think of some other ways. Let me share one. We have employer and employee rights. Should you, as an employee on the job, have a guarantee of privacy? And actually, it's legal for employers to listen to business phone calls and monitor all non-spoken personal communications. Is that not interesting? There's where you have your rights versus the employer's rights. You work for the company. That company must protect itself and its other stakeholders, which means it may need to protect itself and its other stakeholders from you. If we did not have a protected right of privacy for, or protection, for the company, then how else would people that have been stealing from companies, who have been stealing from clients, how else would the company be able to find out and then help to make sure that this person was prosecuted for their crime, unless the employee's privacy was broken? Think about it. To find out about some of these Ponzi schemes, to find out about some of the thefts and other criminal acts, you have to access that employee's company computer. You have to record those conversations. You have to access, file cabinets that are locked in their office. See how we can have that dilemma? So another approach is the justice approach. It's guided by respect for impartial standards of fairness and equity. The policy is administered impartially and fairly, regardless of any demographic that you can subscribe to. So, can you think of examples of organizations that seem to have violated the justice approach, where the policies aren't impartially administered, they're not fair? I'm sure you can rattle off quite a few. Let me share a fairness one because it can often be an issue. Employees may be resentful when a corporation CEO is paid a salary and bonuses worth hundreds of times more than what they receive, even when the company performs poorly. Why does the CEO get that salary and bonus and the company is suffering and employees will never, ever make that amount of money from that company? It's not impartial. It's not fair, right? So that's an example. So Pat is a manager at State University. Pat's deciding how to set up a procedure for registering online that gives students fair access to courses. Pat is engaged in what approach? Utilitarian, individual, moral rights, or justice? If you said D, justice approach, you're correct. Pat is guided by respect for impartial standards of fairness and equity. I mentioned white collar crime already. Basically, it's Ponzi schemes, illegal trading, and Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 established the requirements for proper financial record keeping for public companies. If you are not in compliance, you could be penalized up to 25 years in prison. There have been so many scandals in the early 21st century tied to white collar crime that led to the passing of this act that sometimes is called SARBOX or SOX or SOX. SOX, it requires a CEO and CFO to personally certify the financial reports. You have to personally say that these are accurate, yada, 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 right? And it prohibits the organization, it prohibits the CEO and the CFO to take personal loans and lines of credit and make them reimburse the organization for bonuses and stock options when required by restatement of corporate profits. It also requires the company to have established procedures and guidelines for audit committees. It is very detailed. Does that mean that there is not going to be a company who's still not going to violate it? Of course not. People are always looking for loopholes. People are always looking for ways to get over on the system. But you see, noncompliance carries a pretty heavy penalty. It depends on whether or not someone feels that they can stand on their head for 25 years or not. I can say that since most CEOs and CFOs usually average around the age of 60, they may want to reconsider. Getting out of prison in 28 years, because I say 28 because by the time you're caught and you go through the trial and all the other stuff, whatever the case may be, that's usually a 3-year period of time. So let's say, tack on the 3 years and then the 25-year sentence. Let's say about 27 to 28 years on top of you're already 60 for most CEOs and CFOs. Is it really worth it? I don't know. Unless you say, hey, the money that I've stashed to the side, my family can live off of it while I'm locked up. And when I get out, I've got my long-term care package. To me, it's just insane. I just couldn't conceive of it. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Any time in prison for me is not worth it. Any time in jail for me is just not worth it. It's not worth it. So, how do we learn about ethics? And it's not just like, we sit down and read a book. No, there is a psychologist, Lawrence Kohlberg. He proposed there's 3 levels of personal moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. The 3 levels um, follow these certain rules. Pre-conventional says the people who've achieved this level tend to follow rules and to obey authority to avoid unpleasant consequences. So if you're a manager, you tend to be autocratic or coercive. You expect employees to be obedient for obedience sake. Just do it, right? It's the right thing to do. Just do it. When you get to conventional, there's a following expectations for others. Most managers are aligned at this level. You are conformist, but not slavish. You generally adhere to the expectations of others in your life. You lead by encouragement and cooperation, and you're more group and team oriented. That's where most managers fall at. When you get to level 3, or if you're at level 3, not get to, but where you're at level 3, you're guided by internal values. It's the farthest along in moral development. Your independent soul, you follow your own values and standards. You're focused on the needs of your employees and trying to lead by empowering those working for you. Only about a fifth of American managers actually reach this level. Only about a fifth. Right? So you could start off at 2. You may not even ever been at 1, but the goal is to really try to get to 3. That's really what the goal should be, your development. Some people just stay at 1. They just stay right there. And some just choose to stay at 2. They just don't evolve beyond. But it's amazing when you can get to 3. So how can you promote ethics within an organization? Have a strong ethical climate. Screen your prospective employees. You can weed people out up front. Institute ethics codes and training programs. Make sure you protect whistleblowers. When a person is taking the time to risk everything to report misconduct, protect them at all costs. There's nothing that hurts more when I think of misconduct than an organization that retaliates against a whistleblower or doesn't protect that whistleblower from retaliation. It's disgusting. Your number one priority is your employees. It's not even your customers. It's your employees. Because you can have customers, but if you don't have employees doing the job, then you can't serve those customers. You get it? So a way that you can screen prospective employees, you have their resume and reference checks. It's amazing how many people just don't go through that process of even really following up to make sure the resume is accurate and that the references are solid. You can use personality or integrity testing to help see if you have any liars that are waiting to get in to start telling lies and doing crime within your organization. Your code of ethics needs to be very strong, very clear, concise, that anyone in your organization can clearly articulate. SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management, did a weekly survey, and it showed that 32% of human resource professionals indicated that their organizations offered ethics training. Only 32% of HR professionals. 32%. That's just ridiculous. That's just way too low. So since the Great Recession, whistleblowing has been on the rise, and there have been an increasing number of tips that are received by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And SEC is what's all tied to Sarbanes-Oxley, is tied to most of our white-collar crimes are somehow aligned to SEC, especially if you talk about stock brokers, you talk about anyone that's involved with securities and any kind of exchange. fall within their periphery. If you're a financial advisor, right? If you're dealing with anything that can have volatile financial impact, that deals with public interest in public monies, right? What I mean by that is if I am an investor or stockholder, right? I own stock in the SEC is regulating, is overseeing, is eyeballing that organization. And there have been an increasing number of tips that have been received, and they average about 4,000 tips a year. 4,000 tips a year coming into the SEC from whistleblowers. They're protected by law, but yet companies are retaliating directly or allowing them to be retaliated against. And it could be something as light as a cold shoulder, to passing them over on promotions, to firing them, to giving them the worst workload, right? To giving them projects that they can never have any growth. It's just so many different ways. That's why it's important that you create a culture that promotes ethical behavior and it protects whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are there to help. When you see something's wrong, you're supposed to speak up. This whole snitches get stitches is what makes you end up in jail or prison next to the person who committed the crime. Or worse, you just never amount to much, your own self. Or you reach a point and you crash as well because you've messed with the whole ebb and flow of life. Justice, right? Everyone has their own opinion, but once again, that then also goes back to where you stand in your values and your ethics. If you don't value others beyond yourself and your inner circle, then you've already made clear where you stand ethically. We all have a social responsibility. Organizations have a social responsibility. There's a duty that you must take action that benefits society and the organization. If ethic responsibility is about being a good citizen, an individual who is socially responsible is an organizational citizen. They take on the citizenship behaviors that will exceed the job description that has been outlined for you, such as being courteous, a sportsman, conscientious, having civic virtue, altruism. CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, is the notion that the organization is expected to go above and beyond the following the law and making a profit. You have to go above and beyond. You can't just be mediocre and average. You have to excel and exceed all the standards. So I have a question for you. Do you feel that money is the be-all and end-all in business? Is it all about the money? Are there other issues that businesses should be concerned about? Can you give any examples? Let me share two possible ones: philanthropy and sustainability. I want you to think of some others. So here's this pyramid, and it's not to be confused with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a CSR pyramid that University of Georgia business scholar Archie B. Carroll created. And it's looking at our obligations as corporations. And you have your philanthropic, ethical, legal, and economic. Some people may believe that a company's first and only duty is to make a profit. However, Professor Carroll, Dr. Carroll, suggests that the responsibilities of an organization in the global economy should take these following priorities, with profit being the most fundamental. That's at the bottom. It's the base, right? And corporate citizenship is at the top. You see that? So where do you believe that most organizations are in terms of the pyramid? Do you think that most organizations have the economic responsibility at the bottom and the philanthropic at the top? Or where do you think most land? I mentioned sustainability, and these are some types of social responsibility. That's where your economic development meets the needs of the present without compromising the future generations to meet their own. That you do not take so much from Earth that there is barely anything left or nothing left for future generations. What is interesting is that in the past, you talk about 100, 200 years ago when we were going through the industrial age, so much was being zapped up, right? We never considered the environment. We never considered how it would impact, what it would limit and reduce future generations beyond the one that we're currently in, right? We shouldn't just be looking at the generations that we could still be alive, but generations when we are not here. Generations when our grandchildren are not here. That's how forward thinking you should be about your impact. And these are the two primary types of social responsibility that is noted by the textbook authors. We call it going green now, right? And it's really entered business mainstream where they've created sustainability programs that are not only have environmental benefits, but they also have been able to save in cost. They've helped in growing revenue, and they've had various competitive advantages. There's a ecologist at Stanford University by the name of Gretchen Daly who said that, quote, "We're driving natural capital to its lowest levels ever in human history." Natural capital to its lowest levels. Natural capital is the value of your natural resources, your air, your water. It's all the things that we depend on as human beings. We can't survive without it. In 2016, there was a poll where 70% of Americans believe that climate change causes extreme weather, which is a rise in sea level. But yet we have all these deniers. And not climate change. Okay. We don't have global warming. Okay. How do you account? How do you account for what's going on? We have exasperated, we have beat down, we have drained our natural capital. It's ridiculous. According to this view of driving our natural capital to its lowest levels, we're approaching the planet's limitations with our activity as humans, the day-to-day things that we're doing, the carbon footprint that we are leaving will exceed the Earth's capacity to generate the resources that we need and the ability for the Earth to absorb the waste that we're creating. By going green, by focusing on sustainability, the hope is that we can reverse what's happening. We can reverse this impact. We can actually create an environment that allows the Earth to generate the resources that we need, absorb the waste that we're just casually tossing. That is the goal. Because if we don't, we will not have the luxuries, the air quality, the water quality, the topsoil quality, the genetic diversity that generations from now will need in order to survive. All of those crazy sci-fi movies and TV programs from the past will, and even from recently, will become the norm. People are not creating these things because they just come out of the thin air. They just know it's because it is a possibility. It could be a reality. The reason for creating these programs, these movies, is to wake us up to say, people, we are killing our planet and we are killing ourselves. That is the key. Every rapper you throw on the ground, and I don't mean hip hop rapper, I mean gum wrapper, I mean candy bar wrapper, the plastics, the waste of our paper, the things that we know can't be recycled, the things that we know clog up the systems, the things we pour down our drains, the things we flush down our toilets. Oh, we're doing it. Some of our illnesses that we have right now are tied to the environment, are tied to what generations before did, and it's impacting us now. Imagine what it will impact future generations. So, when you make charitable donations to benefit humankind, you are being philanthropic. It's another important social responsibility. Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie famously said in the 19th century that he who dies rich dies thus disgraced. My dad always said, die broke, right? You need to give it away. You need to, he was like, don't, doesn't need to be going to the IRS, right? It needs to go away through family, through charity, through your good works, through your companies, so that you just don't, you're not sitting back and you've got all this grandiose, but it when you die, it's going to the state. If you don't have a will, if you don't have a family, it goes to the state. And if there's no one that claims that money, the state absorbs it, uses it for its own good. So Bill and Belinda Gates created this giving challenge, and so far 136 billionaires have joined, and it's a commitment to dedicating a majority of their wealth to philanthropy. Philanthropy. I was going to say to philanthropic um, endeavors, but to philanthropy and philanthropic endeavors. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has pledged to spend billions on health, overcoming poverty worldwide, on education, and there is a video that McGraw-Hill did called Cell Phones for Soldiers that showcases philanthropy and ethics, that I will try to remember to upload in the classroom so that you guys can watch and see. There are quite a few beyond the billionaires who've done this pledge, but there's tons of billionaires who they already just give, but they give through their organizations also. So there are some who their companies are already focused on CSR. Their companies are built on CSR, right? So it is becoming a shift. And if you see, this is an older generation. They're in their, let's see, Bill should be in his 60s now, I believe. And so they're taking this stand. And this is something that should create a focus that every business owner, and I'm telling you this because some of you are in business right now or you have desires to be, you should shift your focus now to say, how can we give back to the community? How can we empower our employees? How can we reduce our waste? How can we leave a smaller carbon footprint on this planet? Now, how can we go more digital and use less paper? What products are we using that are having a negative impact on our health, on the land, in the air, on our communities? You can do it now. You don't have to wait till you're a billionaire to do it. Get it done now. So how does being good pay off? It has a positive effect on your customers, a positive impact on your customers, on your employees' attitudes and their intentions to quit. I mean, think about it. If you're working for a great company that's about doing good and being well and living well and treating others with respect and dignity, you're more inclined to stay to work because you want to enjoy and thrive in that environment. Their behavior improves, their performance improves, sales growth just peaks and sparks and sizzles and has fun, right? There's efficiency throughout the company. Revenue is up, stock prices are high, profits are great. There's a survey that says that 88% of respondents said they were more apt to buy from companies that are socially responsible than from those that are not. Employees reported higher levels of organizational commitment, trust in their leaders, job satisfaction, and motivation when managers displayed ethical leadership. We're more willing to display citizenship behavior and to produce higher task performance when our managers exhibit ethical leadership. There are studies that suggest that profitability is enhanced by a reputation for honesty in corporate citizenship. It pays off. Being good pays off in ways that it's just priceless. You can't put a number on it because it just keeps growing and growing and growing. It's endless. How can you trust a company is doing the right thing? I said this on the very first slide, the intro slide. How do you know they're doing the right thing? Just because they say they are. Well, corporate governance is the system that governs that company so that the interests of stakeholders are protected. It's carried out by your board of directors, and it's about long-term strategy, sustainable finances, accurate reporting, and having a positive work environment. More attention is paid to strengthening corporate governance so that directors are clearly separated in their authority from the CEO. So when you think about Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Adelphia, when they, you have that period 2001 and 2002. Think about prior to that and the board of directors. And these companies had to file bankruptcy while there were allegations that their CEOs were, involved in. I'm adjusting this. There we go. Didn't mean to do all that. And these huge financial scandals, right? What was going on with the board of directors? Where was the corporate governance? Aubrey McClendon is this chief of natural gas producer for Chesapeake Energy, and he was the highest paid of CEOs in 2008. But when gas prices plummeted, it reduced the value of the company shares by 80%. By 80%, their shares dropped. So he had to sell off his personal antique map collection for $12.1 million. The appraiser was an expert who assembled the collection in the first place. The buyer of the map was Chesapeake Energy. Does this pass the smell test? Really? Let's break this down. The company's shares plummeted by 80%. The leader of this company sells his map collection for $12.1 million. The person who said it was worth $12.1 million is the person who first assembled his collection. The person or the entity that buys this collection for $12.1 million is Chesapeake Energy, the company that he runs. And it's just all wrong, right? I know you're rolling your eyes. And this happens. And think about it. Did you ever hear about it? Did you read about it? Most likely not. Lack of corporate governance can lead to tragic consequences. Now, let's be clear. In 2013, McClendon resigned from the company, citing philosophical differences. Why? Because they had a reconstituted board. They got a new board that came in. And after he burned through $19.4 billion in 2011, and the following year, another $21.6 billion, he started a new energy company using everything from a fine wine collection to his stake in the Oklahoma City Thunder basketball team to help fund this new company. But 2015, Chesapeake Energy files a lawsuit against him, accusing him of stealing trade secrets. In early 2016, Chesapeake Energy lost 50% of its value because rumors spread that it might be preparing to file bankruptcy. Soon after that, McClendon was indicted on charges of bid rigging, of conspiring to rig bids for the purchase of oil and natural gas leases during the time he was the CEO of Chesapeake Energy. Here's something crazy. The day after he was indicted, he was found dead in his car after a high-speed crash into a concrete wall. That's just awful all the way around. Hence why I said lack of corporate governance can lead to tragic consequences. Imagine if Chesapeake Energy had a strong corporate governance. McClendon would have never been able to do what he did. The company would not have had these significant financial problems, and most likely the man would still be alive. That is the disturbing reality of all of this. Here you just see the appendices for all the sections. If you have any questions, please email me. I hope that this presentation has been helpful. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this. Make sure that you write your summary about what I've shared and what you've learned from this discussion. And even if you'd like, answer some of the questions that I've posed in this presentation. It's important that you take from this so that it helps you prepare for your quizzes and exams, but also it helps to make you better prepared as an ethical manager and owner. Um, you guys have to really see the benefit of these lessons in learning this information. I hope that it has been as deemed as valuable to you as it's been for me. With that, have a wonderful day. Thank you.